Pleasure. And so, you know, in some ways this talks the rough end of the stick because, you know, there's almost no pictures that you can actually, you know, show for, you know, writing proposals, or at least if you did, that'd be pretty boring. So I abandoned all attempts to make my slides sexy, interesting, or anything else, and so I thought instead I would just try and say, you know, tell you some interesting things. All right, how's this going to work? Yes, okay. So I'm going to give a little bit of context initially, although you'll see I'll come back to the context again at the end because there are some additional things I want to say. A bit of background, some preliminaries, talk about the proposal, the process that the proposal then goes through, make some comments about how the TAC works, what the TAC looks for, and yeah, so that's where we're going to go. So in the background, Elena's already given you a very good feel for the telescopes that are available to you. You know, so those are the ones that Australia, you know, either owns or buys time on. But the international suite of telescopes is really extraordinarily large. So, for example, Australian astronomers have always been quite successful on Hubble Space Telescope. Now, I certainly wouldn't be recommending that the first proposal that you ever write is to Hubble because it's actually kind of the hardest place probably to get time. But you shouldn't cross these sort of telescopes out. You know, a bit of practice, and they're certainly within you know, you should be able to get time on them in the end. Now, one of the first things you need to know is that telescope time comes in all sorts of different buckets, and I've listed a sort of fairly generic list here, which pretty much covers the Australian one. So there's just a normal program. You apply for a couple of nights or something like that. So that's reasonably straightforward. But then there's large programs which may, you know, have a really lot of nights, or long programs that run over several semesters. And usually, I mean, if I went in and asked for a long-term program and I just had me on the list, basically there's no way I'd get up. I can tell you that right now. So these are usually these big programs, well, and I wouldn't get up for a multiple number of reasons. It wouldn't necessarily be the science, but they would look at me and they'd say, she doesn't have time to do all that. You need a team of people to actually collect the data and to then make good use of it. So these are usually big teams, and in Australia, typically they're sort of survey programs. So we have, you know, a very rich and deep program of survey programs. There's director's discretionary time. So if you think you've got something really hot that doesn't take too much time, you may be able to convince the director of a facility to look at your stuff. Now, of course, Warwick Couch, who's the director of the AAT, has time, and so you know he's the guy you would go to for the facilities AAT owns. But every director on every telescope, including the Hubble Space Telescope director, has time. Okay, it's typically around 10% of the time on the telescope, and they typically don't use it for themselves. They usually wait for people to come to them with something that's either very timely, so it's suddenly come up and you need time, or otherwise, you know, something like, well, as I say, it's usually timely, or you've just thought of it, or, you know, there's something like that, because otherwise you would go through the normal process. Okay, service time, which we just mentioned, and the service time on the AAT, for example, is a really great place to do a little pilot study. So you've got an idea, you think it's going to work, you're not 110% sure, or you just need a couple of hours to get a single object or something like that. Service time is exactly the right place to go. Okay? And once you've actually attempted, you know, you've done a couple of observations in service time, you've established that whatever it is that you want to do is feasible and realistic, you can then go for a normal program up here with something to back up the claims you're going to make about whether or not you can do it. Target of opportunity, this is about time, so, you know, you're chasing supernovae or something else like that, so you don't know when it's going to come up, but you've got a pretty good idea it will come up, so you can get approval for a target of opportunity, and then you can get an override. So the supernova goes up, whoever's on the telescope gets bumped, you get the time. Okay, that's basically how it works. And then I've sort of got Australian time versus open time. So, the AAT, we basically have an open skies policy, so anybody can apply to our telescopes, and as Elena mentioned, the Americans are excellent in this regard. All their telescopes are open skies, so you can bid into those and also research. All right. So a few more things. So telescope time is valuable, and I'll get down to that in a moment. But what that means is there's usually fairly stiff competition to get time on telescopes. And we talk about oversubscription rates, which is just the ratio of the time requested in each observing session, usually each semester, over the time available. And so, the typical sort of range would be from about 2, and HST usually has about the highest oversubscription rate. It's running at around 5 to 6, I think, at the moment, although there was a period, 10 years back when it was running at 10. That's pretty brutal. You've got to think hard if you know the oversubscription rate is 10 before you put a lot of effort into applying for time. I should say it ran at 10 because if you got HST time, you got an hour, you also got something like $20,000 that went with the hour, each hour that you got, and that was a lot of money to back up your research program. So that was why people were really pushing hard to get it. Now, our telescopes, we sort of bop around somewhere, between 1.5 and 3, usually. It sort of varies for the different buckets we've got, but it can be quite spotty because our allocations are quite small, and, we may not get a huge number of proposals. But it's always worth looking at that before you apply for time, because it gives you an idea of just how competitive a particular telescope is. I should say also a lot of observatories are good about publishing the right ascension range over which they get proposals. So there are some favoured spots that people like to look, and you find that in that right ascension range, it's actually quite hard to get time. So it might be quite heavily oversubscribed in that right ascension. These are just things that are worth being aware of. Okay, and all of this feeds into the cost of running the telescope per night or per hour. Varies hugely. So I've got a little I don't know what. I sort of made this up, but the cost of running the ANU 2.3 metre might be $1,000 a night. It's not going to be much more than that. So that's not so pressing, although it's probably a big buy out of RSAA budget. But HST is about $45,000 an hour. If you actually add up the support and everything else. So when they give away an hour, they really worry that they're giving it to somebody who's going to do something useful with it. All right. So now let's just think about why you're applying for telescope time. And I think this is the bit that people sometimes lose sight of a little bit. And this is really the important question that you want to answer. You want to have something really good that you want to do with that time. You want to answer a science question. You want to be very clear about what it is. Okay? So that's your starting point. And kind of if you're just doing it because you think you ought to, odds are it's not going to fly. Okay, so you've got to have something, a great piece of science that you want to do. I put the second one in as well because, as an astronomer, some of you are students, I know, and so you're kind of tagged onto a team. You're doing what your supervisor expects you to do, or you might be part of a big survey team, and that's fine. The data sort of appears, out of the sky somewhere. But if you're actually serious about, a career in astronomy, and it's something that you want to go on and do for a few decades or longer, then applying for observing time and knowing the process and being able to get observing time doesn't have to be all the time, but on a reasonably regular basis is something that it's a core activity of being an astronomer. Okay. So it's something you want to take seriously. All right. Now we're going to. The jump-off point is the call for proposals. Okay, and every observatory issues this. It typically comes out a couple of months before the closing date. Okay, and it will start giving you the ground rules of what your proposal needs to look like. Okay, so I've already mentioned that you want a sort of a good question to be answering. I've called it a big question. It doesn't always have to be a big question. It just has to be a good question. It has to grab the people who are going to be assessing it, who are typically your peers. It also needs to be a clean experiment. Now, what I mean by that is it's all very well to say, you know, I'm going to do the experiment that tells us what dark matter is. But, you know, what am I going to do in 3 nights on the AAT that is going to tell me what dark matter is? And the answer is, well, I certainly haven't thought of it yet. Okay, so you've got your question, but then the next layer down is, you know, can I actually construct an experiment that is going to give me an opportunity to answer that question? There are lots of proposal instructions, and you need to read them very carefully. It's still surprising how often people stuff that up. You've got to check the archives, and I think you've had talks yesterday about the archives. You know, very often you can find enough data in the archives to do certainly the preliminary stuff on a proposal. And then this is not an absolutely critical part, but you do want to look and see if there's other data or simulations that you can leverage at other wavelengths. It always you know, puts a bit more context. All right. Now, so the next step, I've got my experiment. I've figured out I've got my science question. I've figured out an experiment that I can do that can answer that science question, and then I've got to get my experimental design. Now, I've just listed all of these things, but again, I think you covered a lot of these yesterday, but it's quite complicated, you know, so you do have to spend a little bit of time thinking through all the issues that needs to go into your experiment. You need to understand your instrument, you need to use exposure calculators, and essentially, or usually, most of the decent observatories supply these anyway, so it's just a matter of going in and using a grey box. Just briefly comment on who is on the proposal and who should be the PI. I personally think it's great if students are able to lead a proposal. When I first came onto the TAC a year or two ago, we essentially, I think in one semester we had essentially no students leading any proposals, and that's pretty sad, right? So if you're involved in the science, it's worth stepping up and writing the proposal and thinking through all of these issues, and then you should be the first name on the proposal. The TAC likes this, okay?
Not always allowed.
Eh?
Not always allowed to be the guy.
Who is going to stop you?
Oh, Swinburne at least has a policy of not allowing students to be PIs on campus proposals.
Oh, interesting.
I think it might be a CAC thing.
That might be, yes, that might be.
I think it might be a CAC thing. I've heard something similar related to CAC before.
Certainly not a KTAC policy, but now that there's this joint process, Swinburne does have their own specific sub-requirements.
So you can go for the AAO side and be a PI on that.
Absolutely.
If you want to apply on the Swinburne. Yeah.
So you can apply for, well, that's interesting. Okay. We'll talk to Swinburne. I mean, they can, of course, do what they like at their time. But certainly the sense that we have would be that students, we're delighted to see students. But if you're going to leave, you should be writing the proposal, substantially writing the proposal. And it doesn't mean you don't have anybody check it or anything else. But you should be deeply involved in putting the proposal together. And then who else you put on there? And you actually need to think a little bit about the team of people that you have on a proposal. Somebody has to reduce the data. There are analyses that need to be done, and so you want to make sure that you've got an appropriate group of people that you're putting forward to actually do the scientific experiment. And well, I've already said that PhD students are really positive. Okay, so what does a proposal look like? So roughly, and again, this is pretty generic everywhere. There's an abstract, there's sort of an introduction, there's scientific justification, some sort of technical feasibility or justification, and the previous time allocated. So just going through these, when a proposal comes to the TAC, you could be reading, or when I have done HST, I have read on occasions more than 150 proposals, okay? If I'm reading 150 proposals, the abstract really has to be good. because, you know, I'm not going to slog through all the arcane details of a proposal if I'm not already very interested in that proposal. I'm not going to spend time, you know, going on the web to check a few things up, asking myself a few extra questions and so on, unless the abstract has told me that this is really something that could potentially do some great science. So it is worth spending time on your abstract, and your abstract should make very clear what it is that you intend to do and why you think you can do it with whatever facility you're going forward with. So really, really important. Now, in the introduction, this is an opportunity to put a bit more flesh around your proposal. You said, I'm going to solve the problems of the universe, you know, I'm going to use this telescope, take these measurements, use this telescope. But, you know, your TAC may not be an expert in whatever it is that you're wanting to do. So the introduction, you probably only have about 5 or 6 sentences, but it's an opportunity to actually place what it is that you're trying to do in context. Okay, a bit of background, where other people have got to, and introduce the TAC to any ideas that they wouldn't normally be familiar with. Now, this is of course a question of judgment, because you may not know the people on the TAC, you probably don't know the people on the TAC, and so you've got to make some estimate of what a sort of average astronomer should know, you know, the sort of general base knowledge that an astronomer is coming off. Okay, and then what you have to, what's special about your project that you have to fill in. Okay. Scientific justification is your opportunity to actually go through the detail of what you're going to do. You've got to knock the jargon out, okay, as far as possible. You've got to have a logical narrative, okay, make it straightforward, and you know, the KISS principle is very good, which keep it simple, stupid is usually what that's interpreted as. So this is your place to actually spell out how the experiment is going to work. There's in the technical section, and you should be careful to give as much detail in there as you can. And then finally, there's usually a question about previous time allocated or other places where you've applied for similar time this round. Okay. The worst offence here is that people don't tell you. Okay, so they hide information. They don't tell you that they're applying for 4 other telescopes in this semester or something else, and then the TAC gets really narky. So it is really worth being as accurate as possible here and telling the TAC what's going on. When you get to the end of this process, the ideal thing is that the TAC has no further questions. They understand exactly what they're trying to do. Okay? Right. You've then there's a lot of technical details, and there's a lot of things that you need to think about. And again, I'm not going to go through those because I think they're being covered in other sessions in quite a reasonable amount of detail. All right. So what's the process? That's what the proposal looks like. What's the process? You want to probably start thinking about your proposal at least 4 weeks out. That would be my rough estimate. Some of the old hands I know do not do this, but if you're reasonably new to thinking about proposals, then at least 4 weeks out. And you also want to start writing the proposal weeks in advance. You have page limitations, and usually the first time you try and write the proposal out, it goes way over the page limitations. So you have to actually think about what you're going to leave in, how you're going to express yourself, and work that through. Don't overfill the proposal. The temptation is to, it's 1 page, you run to the margins, you make the font as small as possible, you have no white space, don't do it. If I'm faced with a really, really turgid piece of writing, that doesn't put me in a good mood either. It's a bit like marking exams, if it comes and it's nicely laid out, those extra words are probably not going to get you anywhere. Okay, so think about your reader. Now, the next thing is that in the modern era, in the old days, we used to, use LaTeX or something like that and send in a PDF file. You still often do PDF things up, but you almost always now enter your proposals on a website. Okay, and every observatory has a different piece of software. Usually involves you bringing something up on your computer, so And whatever it is that you bring up usually changes each semester, so you can't do what you did last semester, so you have to bring it up, get it operational, make sure it's working. And you want to, you don't want to be doing this with, 3 hours to spare, if at all possible, okay? So try and do this in advance, make sure everything's operational, and that when you push the button to say, yep, it's ready to go, that it's actually going to work. Help is available, and Elena explain some of that. All right, so then you've got to submit your proposal. It does have to be on time. I was going to tell you the worst occasion that I had on this was when I was applying for a Hubble Space Telescope proposal one time. And, all observatories are really strict on this. But I was doing it with a colleague who was in the US. We were on the phone. He was in Princeton, I was in Melbourne. We were, finalising the proposal, sort of backwards and forwards, and midnight in the US was the submission time, and at 2 minutes to midnight, I hit the submit button, right? And so as the clock ticked through the midnight, it was still transmitting, winding its way across the Pacific. It was fine, it was in, I got through the door before it closed. But let me tell you, this is quite stressful. It's not, it can take years off your life, so it's not something you actually want to do. All right, it got up though. That was a good thing. But I really truly don't recommend it. Now, then once you get it in, the observatory will go through and check your proposal, and they'll check. They'll check it for compliance. So have you read the instructions and done all the right things? They'll check the technical aspects of what you're proposing to do. You've said you want to look at an object that's this bright for this long so that you can get this signal to noise. They'll check all of that for you. Now, quite often they will come back to you and say, well, look, you said this, we think that, and usually there's a little bit of a negotiation and it gets sorted out. So, you don't get thrown out for that. Sometimes, though, you you can have a fatal flaw, which happens, probably a couple of proposals each semester are fatal, but mostly it's okay. Then the TAC meets, and you get some feedback. Okay, you will always get a few sentences telling you what they thought of your proposal. So the TAC. So I'm talking largely about ATAC, which is the Australian TAC here, and we've got 7 people on it. We cover a very broad range of areas, so from cosmology through to planets, okay? And so obviously when you're, and everybody votes on every proposal, okay, unless they're conflicted. And so when you write for ATAC, you need to write for the non-expert, because there may be an expert in your area, but there will absolutely be non-experts on the TAC as well. If you apply to HST, for example, or to ITSO, they have some, ITSO I think has about 800 or 900 proposals now, and so they break up into panels, and those, there might be a cosmology panel, for example, and so you'll have a much higher level of expertise across that panel than you would have with the sort of TAC that we have at ATAC, where, we probably have a total of about 80 or 85 proposals each semester. Okay. So you want to write for your panel. Okay, you really do have to, all TACs rank, okay, they grade and rank, and so what you're trying to do is to get up towards the top of that ranking level so that you're the one that gets allocated time. So you have to think about your reviews. They usually use triage, which means that they're pre-graded, and the pre-grades, I'll watch. The pre-grades are then used to triage. Okay, triage means you basically drop the bottom third off the list without much discussion. Okay, and that's just so that if you've got an oversubscription of around about 3 or something, you're clearly not going to get right down to the bottom of the list, so you don't spend a lot of time looking at those. So you don't want to be one of those. And then somebody presents your proposal. Okay. So TAC questions. Let me just go back. I'll move a bit quick. I've really gone through all of this, okay? Science question, most important. Describe the experiment. I always advise treat this like a physics experiment. Think of how it's going to, how it's going to answer the question. Will the data do it then? Have you done a pilot? Is the data good value for money? Have I asked for 20 nights to do something that really isn't very exciting, or do I only need 1 night to do it? And then the proposals are ranked. So I'll spend it. Go to this. So these are the mean TAC questions, right? So when the TAC sits around the table, this is the sort of thing that they will ask. Do I care about this science, right? If you get a no there, you're behind the 8 ball very, very quickly. So you've got to encourage, make the science question something that we actually care about. It's interesting, it's exciting. It's on the forefront of what we are trying to understand. Is it a science question? Is it stamp collecting? Okay, I looked at one of these last year and I want to look at another one this year. Or is it a fishing trip? If I go out and look at this, it just might be interesting, No idea what it's going to be, but yeah. So those are all questions there. Why have you asked for 25 sources? Why not 10? Why not 50? Very often not justified. Is this an efficient use of the telescope? Is it the right telescope? Could I have done it on the 2.3 metre and I'm asking for 4 metre time, or on the 4 metre and I'm asking for tech time? Has it already been done? The TAC are reasonably competent and often will know what's going on. Are there any serious mistakes? And really, the TAC works in a way mostly which says, can I chuck this proposal out? That's how they approach each proposal. Can I chuck it out? Can I drop it down to the bottom of the ranking? So this is what you're fighting against. Okay, so the wash-up, you either get time and then you get into phase 2, which is where you actually plan the observations, and you want to do that as quickly as possible because, within most systems, the sooner you're in, the sooner, well, particularly if it's queue scheduling, the sooner you're in, the sooner you might get your data taken. Or if you don't get time, it's not fatal. We do see proposals coming back again and again and again. And so if you haven't got up, think about whether there's a fatal flaw in your proposal or whether you can improve it the next time. Also, the bottom line is tax change. And what might get chucked out one time might go straight to the top the next time because somebody might say, actually, this was really good. I don't know why you didn't support it. All right. Whoops. So the context again. So very quickly, I'll try and get through this quickly. Innovative science is always a joy and a pleasure for a TAC. So if you think of a new way of approaching a problem, use it as the basis for an experiment. Telescope expertise. In the old days, when I started doing astronomy, you could become an expert on an instrument on the AAT, and you could use that instrument for 20 years. You became an expert. You could really learn how to operate. This is not happening anymore. You saw the list of telescopes that we have access to. You might only get one Magellan observing proposal up in 10 years. And so you actually have to think about how you're going to use telescopes, which you're not particularly expert at. You have a generic expertise, but you don't have the specific expertise. And so you need the good generic skills, you need good recipes, and you need a good pipeline. And you want to have a look and see what is supplied with the instrument, because you're going to have to reduce the data. You don't want to actually be thinking about how you're going to reduce IFU data for the first time if there's no pipeline. That's a massive, massive undertaking. Big surveys are the new norm, and it's actually a good strategy to be involved in at least one of them. And then I asked this question right back at the beginning: are you or will you become a serious astronomer? Because if you do, you have to get involved in this process. It's quite a crucial sort of process to master if you're going to be an astronomer. All right, I won't go through this, but there's just been some a couple of interesting papers recently, and Neil Reid has written one on HST just talking about who gets time. and what the sociological factors are that might govern success or otherwise on a TAC. It's not completely on merit, is all I will say. But I just sort of, and I'll put this online, but you go have a look at the paper and it just tells you that even though we try extremely hard, these processes aren't quite perfect yet. All right, that's all.
Thank you, Rachel, for that excellent insight into how TACs think that is someone who I think I've probably sat through over about 80 of these meetings over the years. And look, I'll be honest, not all of my proposals are successful necessarily, but there certainly are some excellent points that Rachel brought there that I think are the key to success. Any more questions for Rachel? Yeah.
So is it possible, coming back to the last point you made about the sociological factors, just to remove all the names from a proposal?
We routinely discuss that, but you see the problem is that one of the things that the TACs actually do think about is this team competent to do this science? And because somebody could write the best proposal in the world and while they're in high school, but have no idea what to do with the data when it comes out. So unfortunately, we always end up saying, well, actually, no, because it does matter who's proposing.
And conflicting numbers as well, so you wouldn't be able to. That's
right. Yeah. So we are very careful about conflicts on the TAC. So if somebody on the TAC, they're out of all discussion. So yeah.
Is it worth maybe rethinking about how the structure of the tax is organized? Maybe you can have one group that is just looking for those perhaps interests, and then remove the names, sends them to somebody for the science. Once those get approved, then a third group just looks at disability and or the experience of the team.
Look, it would be wonderful if we could do that. You've also got to remember, like all the things that we do, there's only a certain investment of time that we can put into this process. I think that the Hubble guys are looking who invest a lot more in this. They only run once a year, right? And they are certainly looking at some of these processes, because after their analysis, they were. But I should say what I didn't say was, even though they uncovered what I would call systemic biases, they also uncovered that it was improving, which was good.
The other thing that maybe could be implemented easily, short of hiding the names, is perhaps to people being on the TAC, being aware of that these systematics are likely or could be happening within the TAC, and oftentimes just people being aware of those unconscious biases. They might think, oh, this female PI or this person from this and that background are not as competent as this other person or something, but that might just be their internal biases. And so recalibrating the TAC by making them aware that this is happening could go a long way to making this disappear.
And that's kind of what we've been doing, well, certainly in the last few years, is discussing things afterwards. At the end of the process, we look and see how many students got up and how many women got up, how many postdocs got up as PIs. But the problem has been, in the last couple of years, that in those groups, not so much the postdocs, but the students and the women, that we've had very, very few PIs. So, the statistics are very spotty. So, I think, as I said, the first time we looked at this, we had one or maybe 0 PhD students leading proposals. So that was, we would like to see more.
Kyle, did you
I was going to add that I have seen proposals where the proactively addresses the issue of who's going to do the work that's going to come out of this proposal. So they'll say, of these 4 people on the proposal, this person will do the observing, this person will do the data analysis. So it alleviates any concerns that TAC might have about, gee, can you really do that with this many people on the proposal?
Well, it's proposals that come forward with that information are, that's a huge plus. It doesn't routinely happen, but it's a huge plus. But particularly on the big survey ones, if we get a proposal and somebody's asking for 40 nights or something like that, to not give us that information would be deleterious.
It's actually part of the KTAC proposal form for campus.
Yeah.
Applicants' roles are asked for. You have to explain
Yeah.
what each person brings to the project. Certainly add that information to an ATAC proposal. If you like.
Well, we had never formalised it. Well, except we expect to see it in big
For big,
proposals.
yeah, so
Yeah. But it's a very good idea. I mean, it's just good practice, isn't it? Yeah.
Would you have to actually give a bit more detail about that person's background as to why they're competent in that particular area for reduction? Would you say so-and-so's had three
Well,
years?
you know, if it's within the Australian community, we kind of know.
it's our blessing and our curse, isn't it? We are a small community.
So that's also one of the reasons why, you know, I mean, you could cross all the names off, and I would still know one of Chris Tinney's proposals every time it came through. You know, so it's just the bottom line. So yeah, in a small community, there's, you know, I mean, if you're in the US or Europe, you know, it's very different. So in this small community, I mean, you know, the science people, you know what they're trying to do, but the neuro people won't be the same. Yeah, no, that's right.
Okay, any other